1. World Grapple Tournament 99 in Tokyo.
SNK.
What? So I'm gonna be incredibly honest here with you. During my childhood, I've never once heard of the SNK company nor its console, the Neo Geo AES and CD. Never even had the chance to touch a single SNK arcade cabinet. In fact, a lot of my exposure to SNK and the console itself were quite limited. This comes from the times when Sony, Nintendo, and Sega were my only exposure to gaming, and that's all I ever really needed. I've played a few titles on the PlayStation like Capcom vs SNK or SVC Chaos. I don't ever want to play SVC Chaos ever again. While I was familiar with the Capcom cast mostly from Street Fighter, the King of Fighters characters were always a mystery to me. And yet they were so cool. Kyo was a personal favorite of mine, and I have never touched a King of Fighters game, at least until 13. Until one fateful day. I remember being in grammar school, and I would sit there thinking about playing me some Donkey Kong Land 2 on my Game Boy, while unknowingly, yet knowingly failing my math test. And one day, a classmate of mine handed me this handheld console. I didn't recognize it at first, but then I read it and it said a Neo Geo Pocket Color. So cool. I had to look up the pricing for this, and honestly, I was surprised that the Neo Geo didn't go for nearly as much as I thought it would. And the first game I remember playing fondly was Dark Arms and very vaguely Sonic Pocket Adventure. This was my first SNK game I played, and to my surprise, it seemed far too overlooked. This game was my jam. I was not going to give this back to my friend. Sadly, I've only ever touched the two games, and the idea of Neo Geo and SNK grew obscure to me again. But it was way better than my experience with a certain other handheld. Hey Alan, how much was that Sega Game Gear console you bought? $650. $650? What? Oh Lord. How many batteries does it take? 6. Sadly, I never had the opportunity to even touch an original console, and looking at the obscure and apparently expensive history of it, you should probably know why. But I did get curious, so I went to open up eBay and see how much these people are selling this console. After some research and eventually getting my hands on the SNK titles via collections or other means, I got this little thing as a gift. The Neo Geo SNK Mini console, packed with a total of 40 different games. They have other variants of this console release, but I'm only going to focus on this specific one since it's apparently the only one that I have. Yeah, don't ask about the unboxing part, I lost all of that stuff, so yeah, let's hop to it. Like any kid, or in my case, a grown adult, we have a weakness when it comes to anything video game related. And when I hop from cabinet to cabinet as much as my allowance would allow me to, seeing an arcade style portable console is enough to draw me towards it. It's safe to say that I love how this thing looks. They even have a sticker above the monitor showcasing 4 of what I expect to be some of the most iconic titles. That slick and nostalgic design just draws me in every single time. It has all the charm of an original arcade cabinet, all packed up into a portable system in the palm of your hands. And for a pretty decent price too. Considering that these numbers don't scare you, you should get your money's worth for a library of 40 original SNK titles. So let's say you talked yourself into it and bought yourself a Neo Geo Mini. So on further inspection, the Neo Geo Mini comes with a 3.5-inch LCD screen, which actually looks great. I had my expectations a little bit low, but when I played on this screen, I was amazed at how crystal the display was. The colors and sprites pop nicely on it, so major props there. Also to mention the arcade style button layout too for handheld play. It also has a power button along with these 3 USB-C ports, 2 for the compatible Neo Geo Mini controllers, and another to power the system itself, an aux port for headphone users to hear those nice classic SNK tunes, and an HDMI port. That's not a normal HDMI port, is it? So that's where my first issue comes with the system. The HDMI port and the controllers are sold separate. It's an optional fit, but if you weren't fortunate enough to grab these said attachments, it'll leave the console feel kinda incomplete. However, buying another controller can go for about $30, so if you want those extra controllers, you're gonna dish out maybe about $60+. The power settings sort of leave me a little bit bummed out. The only way for the system to operate is to have it hooked up to a power source, so portability leaves a lot to be desired. It could have used a chargeable battery or maybe some AA batteries, just not 6 of them. You could happen to have an external power source for you to operate this thing on the go, but at least to me it'll feel a little silly just kinda lugging this thing around. But unfortunately the issues don't end there. I mentioned before about how much I adore an arcade cabinet design as an idea for a portable console. However, while it does play like a portable handheld, it handles nothing like one. Well, you get what I mean. Trying to play this thing in handheld mode can be a chore if you're looking to find some sort of comfort, especially if your hands happen to be a little bigger than you expected. You know, like mine. On the bright side, I'll give it its props for the controls. The joystick and buttons are pretty responsive. I found movement easy on the joystick, and the characters feel absolutely natural as they move around the screen. The joystick feels great. I found inputting commands in fighting games like King of Fighters or Fatal Fury easier than I thought. The buttons feel pretty great too. They're slightly clicky, but they all do their intended inputs without much of a hassle. For the most part. The controls are slightly hindered by its intended design. More times than none, I find myself holding the system in different ways just so I can find some comfort, depending on which game title I choose. This might mostly be a me thing, but playing games like Metal Slug can really cramp my hands up, given how absolutely hectic and chaotic that game can get. Also, this might be a slight nitpick, but the labelings on the buttons are barely visible unless you play this game in a well-lit room. I mean, the reflective layout kinda works, but who would have fun trying to angle the system around just to see what button does what? But if you had happened to pick up a controller or two for your console, then you'll have these, the Neo Geo Mini controllers. Upon observation, these controllers look like an exact copy of the originals. And in a sense, you'd be right. It has a slight heft to it, and to my surprise, the controller feels incredibly comfortable to hold. But then I immediately noticed something was wrong. The analog stick, it feels so empty. Then I suppose the buttons are remapped on the controller, but that's really not much of a big deal, to be honest. This ain't the Neo Geo controller. Unfortunately, they say that the thumbsticks are kind of hard to make. I mean, it wasn't hard for Squidward to remind SpongeBob that he needed to breathe, because if he didn't...
Empty your mind of everything that doesn't have to do with fine dining. 12 seconds later. He's a goner!
I've never held the Neo Geo controller. I had to do some extensive research and learn a little bit more about the console's history, all thanks to some nifty documentaries. The clickiness of the analog was like a cross hybrid between the D-pad and the analog stick, which in turn made for some responsive and mostly satisfying movement. These controllers are praised for a reason. You take that away and you have a half-hearted attempt of what is supposed to be a nostalgic and mostly enjoyable experience. Don't get me wrong, all things considered, the controller is responsive and the model itself is nice and fitted for my hands like the original. But then I'm immediately reminded that this is just a cheap knockoff compared to the original, especially once my thumb starts to move the analog stick around. It's just not right, but it's not too offensive. It does the movements pretty much some sort of justice. I've had some easier times playing certain specific games with it, but I feel like playing fighting games was easier with the handheld mode. And I got big hands. I won't outright say that it's the worst controller because I don't think it really is, but I feel like it'd be more offensive to an actual longtime Neo Geo fan. But whatever, you heard me complain long enough about the controller and the console. What about the games? Well, not just quite yet. We got one other thing to talk about. I'm gonna keep it short just for your sake. It's not really much to talk about anyway. It's a menu. It's so painfully basic and inoffensive. It's not even funny. It works, but minimal setting options really don't leave much to any custom preferences you want outside of volume and being able to save. This is just for the console itself, but for HDMI setup, you have a few extra options. They're basic, like adjusting the resolution for your screen for one. If you use full screen, take it off of full screen. Image quality optimization smooths out the pixel art to sort of enhance the visuals, but the pixels sort of meld and bleed into each other and it looks kind of unnatural. I personally would never use it. As far as the quality for whatever display you own, it's only set to 720p. Me personally, I think the display looks better on the console. But whatever, we're at the games, let's talk about the games. As I mentioned early in the video, there's a total of 40 different SNK titles to choose from, though there is a select number of games that I've noticed that aren't exactly like the original arcade version, like Metal Slug where they bleed sweat or paint, or Fatal Fury with PG-13. Aside from that, the games run pretty well. There were times where I noticed a bit of lag in specific points in certain games like Metal Slug, but other than that, there isn't any real problems here. But aside the censorship, there's a lot of games that I actually enjoy here. But if we talked about every single game here in one video, we'd be here forever. Several of these games could potentially be entire videos all on their own, so here's an abridged version of what I think of each game. First game, first in the series. Title displays exactly why this is one of SNK's top IPs. I've had not responding issues that move faster than this game. Better version. Barely any slowdown, more weapons, more enemies. It's the best in the series. I'll take back my previous statement. This is the best Metal Slug experience. The last level is longer than all levels combined though, so be prepared. It's not as interesting as the other titles, but it's still kind of a fun playthrough. Despite for some reason Tarma and Area are taking a back seat on this game, I can see why people say this one is underrated. Metal Slug 5 is really fun. Wrestling giant monsters dead smack in the middle of the city. I had more fun than I'm willing to admit. Probably not for the same reasons though. A little more fast paced and more beat 'em up like than its predecessor, until the game gets really difficult and this ends up happening. Let's What's with all the nut shots there? Sengoku 3 is a little stiff. I kinda had to get used to lining up the enemies and stuff, so it's, I played this title way too much, though I gotta admit, these ghouls knew exactly what was up. I don't think I'll ever get enough of that walking animation.
Ooh, hold up, let me talk to you for a minute.
This game takes me back to the Super Nintendo days. It's lighthearted platforming fun once you get used to things. Sort of reminds me of Klonoa. I've played a lot of Soldiers of Fortune, and this game is absolutely sick. Listen to this music. I like the art direction better in the first game, but this one is every bit as sick as the first. I personally didn't care much for this one, but that wolf got freaking annihilated with that club though. Reminds me of Punch-Out. It's honest reaction-based fun. I'm just not good at it. A bit basic, but it's accessible and easy to get into. The game simply didn't give me a chance to enjoy the game, and apparently I'm terrible at wrestling. King of Fighters is a classic, so I'm just going to count all the KOF games as one category. I'm terrible at all of them, but they're fun and unique fighting games. I think the last two are the only ones that are sensible. Lord, I am sick of these fighting games calling me out. Alternating between the foreground and background is pretty cool. This one hits just right. Probably one of my favorites from the Fatal Fury type. The sprite work in this game is absolutely stellar. Also, I think it's one of my favorite fighting games here. It's so good. Samurai Showdown is fun, but I know these games are notorious for being violent, so they replaced the blood with vegetable juice. I know this presence. I have met it before. Hansel, you felt that presence too? The presence will bring misfortune to the world. This blade shall remove the sick root of evil.
Come on, come all! Don't be shy! Step right up and win valuable prizes!
Bobsy Smash Puny Wallies.
Oh, the presence got me!
You're worse than my friend!
Samurai Showdown 4 looks great, but the blood is mayonnaise now. But this one does have blood. What's with the censorship in certain games? Another stellar fighter. This game feels like it's incredibly underrated. I love this. I personally played the SNES version. It was slower, but I always loved that intro theme. World Heroes is still as fun as I remember. A pretty unique tag fighter game. This is one of the other few games that have blood. Chung is one of my favorite characters, by the way. Just look at how he's dressed. And he has like high-pitched Bruce Lee screams. The weapon system took a bit of getting used to, but it's really entertaining and satisfying once you understand how it works. It's a fun fighter. I don't like golf. The opposing team gloats so hard when they score 1 point. Yeah, so what? You scored on me. What you gonna do? You gonna hug your coach next? This guy actually hugged his coach. Okay, it's football, but I'm awful at it. So next, the best but most annoying shooter on this game. Every time they let you know that there's a power-up prompt, they just make it clear and all this text is just plastered all over the screen. But it's like one of the best looking shooters on here, so I'll give it a pass. It's a fun game. Play it. Reminds me of R-Type. It's pretty good. Difficult, but good. Probably my least favorite of the three, but it still functions as a decent shoot 'em up. It's a different take on Tetris, but it didn't keep my attention for long. And that's all 40 titles. Whew, that was a bit of a trip, huh? All things considered, at least I had some fun with it. Playing through some of SNK's major classics was an experience, albeit a sort of irritating one. The best way I can sum up the Neo Geo Mini is half-assed. It's got many of its amazing classics going for it, and the controls weren't too bad considering your preferences, but to purists of the Neo Geo, I would likely have a harder time recommending this. Certain games feel different depending on which titles you happen to play, and considering they removed the clickiness of their analog, somehow a D-pad would have felt less offensive. It was a rocky experience, but all in all, I've enjoyed the time I had discovering many of the games I've come to play on the Neo Geo Mini. So in the meantime, I'm gonna have to go nab that Neo Geo Pocket collection I've been hearing so much about for the Switch. Oh my god, they have it!